we have only two presentations before we engage you. And the first presentation is from Arlan Brucal, and he got some traveling issues, so he's speaking to us from London. And he has is co-author of a report that's been lying outside there, focusing on consumer impacts from MEPS and eco-design standards. So, Arlan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Perfect. Then, please, you can start. We hope everything works out.
Okay, sounds good. Okay. Good afternoon to the organizers and participants of the Ecodesign Conference. Thank you for having me here, or there, or wherever. Before I move on, my sincerest apologies for not being able to physically participate in this meaningful and very timely conference due to visa issues. Anyways, what I will present to you is an overview of a research that I did with Michael Roberts of the University of Hawaii. Here in this paper, we asked whether energy efficiency standards could hurt consumers using data on monthly appliance sales in the US. So if you ask economists, most, if not all of them, would say that they would prefer price-based mechanisms over standards in curbing externalities associated with energy use. For example, in a recent survey done by the University of Chicago, 93% of economists say they would prefer a gasoline tax over fuel economy standards. NYU had similar findings in their 2016 survey about market-based mechanisms versus performance standards. And of course, the quote from Lucas Davis of UC Berkeley and Ted Geyer from Brookings reinforced the notion that perhaps standards are a more costly way of reducing emission. Now, in practice, however, standards are more prevalent, well, at least in the US or at least in the previous administration. Some of these standards include the Corporate Average Fuel Economy Standards, or the CAFE, which increases average fuel economy of cars and light trucks produced for sale in the US. They also have building standards, such as the LEED Green Building Rating, appliance standards, which includes the Federal Minimum Energy Standards for major household appliances, and of course the energy labels, which you can see the Yellow Guide and the Energy Star. Now, a major justification of energy efficiency standards relate to consumers' apparent underinvestment in energy efficient technologies. For example, in this illustration, an engineering study estimated that switching from incandescent halogen to LED could result in savings of up to 622 pounds, or some $700. Yet, in 2016, roughly 50% of recent new bulb shipments to US retailers are incandescent halogens. So clearly, there is so much demand for energy inefficient light bulbs, despite studies showing huge benefit light bulbs switching, at least in terms of net present value terms. Of course, not everyone is convinced that consumers are indeed under-investing in energy efficient technologies. Some argue that certain product attributes that consumer value are not actually directly observable to analysts. In fact, the illustration below, like one, if you compare the Lamborghini versus a Honda Fit, you would see that probably energy efficiency is a small fraction of what really consumer value the most. And so if consumers, or if there's no evidence that consumers are not really under investing in energy efficient technologies, then standards impose unnecessary burden on consumers. So while standards can be easily implemented under the current law at the discretion of implementing agencies, which can be another reason why standards are more prevalent than carbon tax, proving that energy efficiency standards do not harm consumers remains to be a major hurdle in implementing them. So up to now, there's still a major challenge to prove that standards do not really hurt consumers. Now, how might standards hurt consumers? There are two ways. First, it could drive up the cost and price of regulated products. The second one, it could reduce at least the perceived quality of regulated products. Now, in this study, we use micro-level data of home appliances sold in the US between 2000 and 2011. So this is monthly. to track down how price and quality change as standards change. We pay particular attention to washing machines or clothes washer, which had more frequent federal minimum and energy standard policy changes in 2004, 2007, and 2011. But we also include Energy Star changes, or at least changes in the thresholds for Energy Star labels for refrigerators, particularly in 2004 and 2007. And then we also looked at price and qualities for appliances that were not under these policy changes, like room air conditioning and clothes dryer. So they would serve as controls. So our exposition includes 5 steps. First, we develop this constant quality price index. I'm going to discuss this shortly. And then we use this constant quality price index to develop this quality index to see how quality changes over time. And based on the CQPI and the quality index, we develop a welfare indicator. So we'd be able to measure what's the welfare implications of these changes in CQPI and quality, and how policy actually changes these variables of interest. And then, of course, we as economists, we always want to look at the mechanisms behind the patterns that we see. Okay, so apologies for this seemingly horrible equation, but this only suggests that the CQPI that we develop is nothing but the percentage change of a model I, or specific model, meaning we define a model based on model number. So it's basically a lot of attributes, including dimensions and even colors. So if they change colors, then the model number would change. So for 2 periods, we look at the average percentage change in the price, weighted by the average sales in those 2 periods to come up to account for the most popular products. And then we base it with the previous CQPI, or at least the weighted average price at the beginning. It's probably easier to explain CQPI in terms of how it actually works and the rationale why we need to do a constant quality price index. So in this illustration, suppose you have 3 models of, say, refrigerators sold in month 1, month 2, and month 3. Now in each month, the price and units sold for each model are given accordingly. For example, model 1 was sold at $200 a unit and sold 100 units in month 1. So if you calculate a simple sales weighted average, the average price for refrigerators in month 1 is $300. Very simple. In month 2, suppose nothing has changed except that the most expensive refrigerators increased sales to 500 units from 100 units in month 1. Take note that average price increased, even if none of the refrigerators had a change in their respective prices. Now, suppose in month 3, the price of 2 less expensive refrigerators fell by $100 each. Notice that the average price is just equivalent to that of the baseline month, even if most prices actually went down. So you see, average price is actually sensitive to the distribution of which models are being sold at a particular time period. Now, on the contrary, if you look at the CQPI, it's less dependent on the changes in the distribution of the most popular and presumably high quality refrigerator. So rather, it actually just captures the changes in the prices of the same model over time. And since the same model is exactly the same in attribute, so what we are tracing, as you can see in the table, is just the changes in the price, holding quality constant. I'm hoping that if this is clear, but if you have questions, just let me know. So this figure shows the trend in average price, or sales weighted average price, the CQPI, and the quality index, which is just the ratio of market average price and the CQPI. So the idea is that if average price is increasing and then the price holding quality constant is declining, then it must be that the quality is increasing or improving. And then later on, we validate this price-based quality index with the use of product attributes that actually reflects higher quality. So in this graph, the left axis measures average price and CQPI, represented by the dark blue and green lines respectively in 2011 dollars. The right axis measures the quality index in light blue line, and the horizontal axis is the time period. So the yellow lines represent the simultaneous changes in the federal minimum and energy standards in 2004, 2007, and 2011, and the Energy Star policy change in 2009. So it's evident here that if you can see that even in the implementation of standards, prices, or holding quality constant, is declining while quality is actually improving. What is more remarkable, and if you notice, right around 2004 policy change, there seems to be a rapid drop in the price holding quality constant. So something is actually happening right around the policy change. And we will go back to it later. So this is the validation of how quality increased. And so we validate our price-based mechanism by looking at the market shares of the attributes that are quite synergistic with energy efficiency. And so we look at the market shares of larger and more compact sizes, more cycle and more wash options, faster spin cycles, and then the transition from top to front loading machines without agitator. And so what is remarkable, and I don't have the graphs here just to in the interest of time, but what is remarkable in our observation is that the new categories of these product attributes are actually being introduced right around the policy change. And so it's sort of an indication that they're probably introducing new models in the market. And we will
sound.
use the CQPI and the quality and to come up with a welfare indicator. And so this table summarizes the average change in the CQPI, quality index, and welfare estimates for washers.
Yeah, can you just go back one?
Refrigerators and room AC. And so what's interesting here in this figure is that for highly regulated equipment or appliances like hose washer, the change in the CQPI and the improvement in quality and welfare is actually higher than during the time of the policy change than any other period. For example, during the 2001 simultaneous change in federal minimum and Energy Star policy change,
we're out again.
During the period than and then the period previous to the policy change and right after the policy change. The same is true for refrigerator, except that during the 2009 policy change, the 2007 is actually much higher. And then for room AC, we don't see any systematic pattern. So what might explain this counterintuitive result?
It's a good question. In order to communicate with microphone.
Product heterogeneity, so they make products more similar, and thereby they resort to more price competition, and that makes the price go down. The second one is maybe standards are pushing firms to accelerate innovation. So there's a holdup in the introduction of new models in the market without the policy, and so when they know that the policies are approaching, then and they know that the other firms are going to introduce new models in the market, then they're going to introduce new models in the market. Now, when doing that, they have to lower down the price of the older models in order to maintain revenue share. And so these are the potential.
Arlan?
No, we lost you now, just now.
Arlan, can you start again with this slide, going through the explanation, because we lost you a couple.
Measure of competition or innovation, and the natural measure would be average vintage, or the number of months since the model are introduced in the market. So what you see here is the sales weighted average vintage over time for washing machines. And so the vertical colored red lines and the orange lines are the policy changes. So what you see is that right around the policy change, there are really huge drops in the average vintage, particularly in 2004. And this is the simultaneous change in the federal and Energy Star thresholds. and it's quite huge. So what you see here is that models are actually becoming newer, and so at the same time they're actually introducing more newer and presumably higher quality models in the market. That's why average vintage is going down. And we validate this. So we validate this that this is due to the policy change. So we looked at the average energy consumption and user cost of the models in the market during these times, and we see that there's a huge drop in the average energy consumption right around the policy change. So we are quite confident that the policy change has a really big role in accelerating um, the introduction of newer models or withdrawals of older models in the market. And so we empirically tested whether the change in the average vintage or the introduction of newer models in the market are actually influencing firms' pricing policy. And so for clothes washer, we see that increasing average vintage from 10 to 15 months is associated with a 10% increase in price. And so assuming symmetry, you see that a decline in average vintage from 15 to 10 is actually associated with a 10% reduction in the price. And this is non-trivial because if you look at the previous plot, the drop in the average vintage is actually around 15 months. And so if you do the math, then the price increase is actually significant. Now for us to test whether the average vintage or the introduction of models is due to its own firm's introduction or the other firm's introduction. So now we're looking at whether it's really competition or it's really a Schumpeterian or what we call the creative destruction or cannibalism, if you will. And so what we see here, what we found is that for highly regulated clothes washers, the vintage effect price declines are associated with within manufacturer introduction and not between manufacturers. So this suggests that it's more of an innovation channel rather than competition. And we do not observe this strong pattern of intra-manufacturer cannibalism in the markets for room AC and refrigerators, which are less regulated, or for AC in this case, it's not regulated at all, or not regulated, meaning there's no policy change during the sample period. And so given our empirical observations, we are arguing that, these observations it's really hard to square this observation with the notion that standards are actually putting a lot of burden on consumers. Standards are not hurting consumers, so maybe they're helping them. And it's also important to note that the benefits associated with these price declines and welfare is actually on top of the positive impact of standards on externalities. And it's also important to point out that these benefits are actually not intended when they implemented these policies. And so what explains this effect of standards on consumer welfare? Then there's an indication that it's more of a policy-induced innovation, wherein firms lower prices of older models as they are forced to introduce new models, meaning new stricter efficiency standards. And so overall, our paper is arguing that perhaps the evaluation of energy efficiency standards should not be limited to just measuring the size or the existence of what we call the energy efficiency gap, or the tendency of the consumers to underinvest in energy efficient technologies. Energy consuming durable goods are actually have a lot of market failures, including pollution externalities, imperfect competition, public goods aspects of innovation, and consumer behavioral anomalies. And so in an ideal world, it's actually suggested that each market failure should have one instrument. So that means that, our findings, which means that maybe energy efficiency standards are actually improving some aspects of it, but we're not sure whether it's actually harming the other aspects, nor are studies saying that what will be the optimal policy for this. And that's all I got. Thank you so much. If you want to download the paper, the link is there in the slide. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you.
And I'm open to questions.
So
everybody's very excited to ask questions. So
Okay.
we will, yeah, Carl, you.
Yeah, any questions?
Hello, this is Alan Meyer from University of California at Davis, and I appreciated your presentation. It was very valuable. I think there are a couple points that I guess I wanted to hear exactly what you said. That was very music to my ears, but at the same time, I can think of some reasons why these results might actually understate the implications. One example might be the existence of another kind of market failure that you didn't mention. It was the principal agent problem. And the International Energy Agency did a study where they looked at what fraction of these appliances were purchased by people who were not going to pay the electricity bills or the energy bills on the products. And they were quite high, sometimes 30%. I think in the case of refrigerators, they didn't look at clothes washers. But that is a major impediment if these people are not going to even pay the energy bills on these products that they're purchasing. It's no surprise that they would have no response. But I think what you're actually describing is not the consumer side of the equation, but the supplier side. And so there we need to look at the market consolidation and the change of the manufacturers that occurred. And as you mentioned, and I think it really needs to be emphasized, that this is not a perfect market in any way or form on the supply side. There are very few manufacturers who implicitly communicate in many different ways and also manipulate their inventory in a way that could affect the results that you report.
So I'm getting two questions here. First one is, comments about the principal agent problem. Would you be able to repeat that, please?
So because of the way the market is organized with a very few large internationally organized manufacturers, they have the ability to adjust their inventories. So to some extent, I'm not quite sure how much of the response that you're seeing may be more of an inventory management issue. I honestly don't know what the answer to that is and how large an impact it could be. But these products do have significant inventory adjustments.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, on the principal agent problem, yes, it's one of the market failures why people seem to observe that there's a lower than optimal take-up in terms of energy efficient technologies, right? But again, what we're saying here in our paper is that maybe it's not the consumer side that has the problem, but maybe it's the supply side. Because some of the studies that I've read, including the sorry, there's a feedback, including the paper by Hunt Olcott, saying that people do actually respond to prices, and people do think about energy efficiency, and so probably what our argument is that there's a lower take-up in energy efficient technologies because there's not enough energy efficient products to begin with in the market. There's a slower than optimal introduction or innovation in the market because this is a highly quality differentiated market, and so players could raise revenues by taking advantage of the novelty of the product. And so what we're seeing is that standards are actually accelerating innovation, which somewhat addresses some of the market pillars already in the market. Now, in terms of inventory, we don't have that in the data because what we see is that how consumers are actually just buying. So these are point of sale data. So when you buy a washing machine, you get the receipt, we get the information. We don't know whether all the inventories are there or maybe there's out of stock. But that would only matter if phones are doing intertemporal price discrimination, right? So they're timing the release of their inventory because they're trying to make use of the novelty of the product. But we're arguing that it only happens to products that have intrinsic value, like iPhones and people, yeah, iPhones or computers. But these are washing machines and refrigerators where you put the kitchen, and so there's no, it's gonna be hard for them to fall in line and have an early adopter. So there's no fashion sort of factor in these products. And then we also have proved that it's not really price discrimination. So we tested whether it's just decreasing the cost or intertemporal price discrimination, but our results suggest that it's more within firm innovation rather than any other else that is driving down the price. I'm hoping that answers the question.
He nods. He nods. Yes.
All right. Should we take one more question?
Oh, I can hear you now.
You hear us through the microphone?
Yes. Hi, Laura Vanvé. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question concerning a comprehension question, because I am not sure that it was really clear what you have said around the story about the major gain on energy efficiency. You have said that it comes not at the beginning, at the start of the when a product starts to be covered by a regulation, but some years afterward. And this morning, somebody said exactly the contrary. Could you maybe try to elaborate on that?
Okay, thank you. I think this slide, I don't know if I'm still sharing the slide with you.
Yes.
But okay, so this slide that looks at the average market price and then the price holding quality constant. So again, if you look at the trend before the 2004 policy change, prices actually, or at least market average price, is actually increasing. And this is the notion that, and this is the widely known notion that probably they're saying that standards are actually increasing the cost. And yes, because the average price that you observe in the market are actually increasing. But the problem is it's also improving quality. And so the value that you purchase is not only the price of the product, but also the quality. And so one has to disentangle quality change from an absolute price change. And we see here, when you hold quality constant, prices are actually declining. And this is what we're arguing, that it's really hard to just look at market price, because market price is confounded by a lot of things. The TV 10 years ago is different from the TV now. Computers, phones 10 years ago are a lot worse than the computers and phones nowadays. And so comparing just the price that you bought 10 years ago and the price that you bought now, it's like comparing apples to oranges. And so one has to control for quality improvement over time. And that's what we did here. And when we did that, we see that prices are actually declining.
Okay.
Does that answer the question?
All right.
Maybe. Maybe.
Oh.
Yes.
Thanks for being with us, Arlan. And thanks for us having you here over the screen. And thanks to Jessica also for doing the technology. Thanks.
Yeah.
And
I'm really sorry. I hope I was there. It would have been a lot easier. Thank you. Thank you so much.